Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for us to create an absolute unit of a PC build? And today we're doing things a little bit differently because usually our primary focus is gaming. But today we're actually looking more at a productivity machine that can absolutely play games as well. And obviously there is always a lot of overlap with this, but realistically if you're creating something for video editing, for photos, for any sort of like real work application that's going to properly hammer the CPU, then obviously your choices are going to have to be slightly different than if your primary focus was gaming. So in this video we're going to walk you through everything essentially you need to know. We've got some of the latest and greatest, some of the latest and greatest components on our desk. We're obviously going to show you how to put it all together, what the thing looks like, and then give you a few recommendations on maybe some things you could change essentially to make it more tailor-made for you. And in this video, when Asus reached out to actually sponsor this, they specifically wanted us to look at Intel, and there's one specific chip that has actually caught my eye that could definitely be worth the investment. So let's walk you through absolutely everything you need to know. I was going to say right after a short word from this really sponsor, but it's Asus. So maybe I'll just go make a cup of tea. So yes, as I say, this is very much going to be a PC build geared towards productivity primarily, but I want to say we will absolutely be properly putting this whole system through its gaming paces as well. In particular, showing off actually the new Intel Boost overclocking profile that you can get on Core Ultra CPUs that aims to, well, boost the performance of the chips, which is going to be interesting, but we'll walk you through that a little bit closer to the time. But when Asus actually reached out, as I say, to sponsor this and they wanted to go with Intel, I was very intrigued because obviously it's changed a lot since the launch. It's fair to say that the launch of Intel Core Ultra wasn't fantastic, but they've been doing quite a lot of stuff behind the scenes to essentially make these chips even better. But I think the main thing really that you need to know about the Core Ultra 7, the reason we're using it today, is because this is a 20-core CPU and it's just had a price drop. So in the UK at the time of filming, you can get this for about £265, £270, which when you think the Ultra 5 is about 250, that is not that much money for a 20-core CPU that for productivity is pretty much going to fly through the vast majority of tasks, right? As long as you're not doing anything stupid. It is a very, very powerful chip. Now, as we know, the gaming performance on this is not the absolute best out there, but with all of the improvements, and especially if you're going to be playing at 4K resolution or high resolution in general, I'm going to be very, very intrigued to see if all of the upgrades that we've been doing over the last few months actually means that we're not going to see any real-world bottlenecking with the 5070 Ti that we're going to be using. But as I say, we'll do all of these tests a little bit later, but primarily for productivity, 20-core CPU is going to be great in multi-threaded tasks. The motherboard that we're using is this one from Asus. It is part of their Prime range, which I actually think has the best color scheme personally, but this one is not actually the most expensive board in the world. It is a Z890 motherboard, so it is going to support the overclocking, and we will be able to use that boost profile once we have actually updated the BIOS on this as well. And again, we'll be having a look at the full performance, but as you can see, pretty much everything that you need. You've got decent I/O on this. If you do go for an even more expensive motherboard, you get more features, more I/O, but realistically, I think for what most people are going to use it for, this is going to be a great choice. As always, the first thing we're going to do is place our motherboard down on top of the box. The reason we do this is because we can actually see everything and it's much easier to get it built up rather than putting it in your case, then kind of have to like reach around and it gets dark, and you've got these tiny little labels here that are much easier to see now. To get our build started though, the first thing we need to do is open up this top slot really easily just by lifting this lever and then pulling this back. This is ultra sensitive. Do not touch any of these pins. Don't drop anything on them. I know plenty of people it's happened to. Big sads, because it will ruin your motherboard and then you won't have a working PC and you'd be very sad. Obviously, your CPU, regardless of brand, will come in a slightly better box than this. This is just the Intel review sample they sent me at the end of last year, and I think they've run out of boxes. Or maybe they just don't like me and they wanted to send one in a cardboard box. But we get our CPU and then we just carefully line this up so it kind of catches into position, and then we lower this down manually and we use this lever just to position that back under this bar, and then this top piece will remove. And you want to save this for later, because if you ever have a problem with your motherboard or you want to swap over to a different CPU, or there's any time period in which your motherboard is going to have exposed pins, this just protects them. Once you have successfully installed your processor, you can then move on to the next component, and this is the memory, or the RAM. And this is one of the things actually that we are changing versus a standard gaming PC, because we've actually gone for a slightly higher capacity. This is 48 gigabytes rather than the 32. That's pretty much the best bet set for a mainstream gaming PC. The reason for this is because most games top out around about like 16 gig, maybe 20 gig of RAM usage. Obviously, it always depends on your settings, whereas productivity apps can demand a lot more, especially if you're using something like Premiere. You probably want to go even further to something like 64 gigabytes of RAM. But the main thing really is that if you are looking at building a productivity machine, no matter what you kind of think you need, I would highly advise you always look at benchmarks and like the needs of those applications before deciding specifically what it is that you want to buy, because there are going to be plenty of areas you can save money and plenty of areas that you will need to spend a little bit more money. And if you get the wrong kind of combination of parts, it can cost you in terms of workflow quite considerably. So if you don't need much RAM but need a really good graphics card, obviously put the money into that. And I realize at this point that I'm guessing and I'm not actually walking you through what I'm doing. It's very straightforward. Just line it up with a slot and then give it a good push at the top and bottom until it clicks into position, and then you have your motherboard mostly complete. Just one thing left to go, and that is this M.2 SSD. This is the first point. You will need a smaller size screwdriver. You will need a slightly larger one for most of the screwing that you're going to be doing with this PC. But it's very straightforward. Just take this off. And something I guarantee a lot of people miss is that there is this little protective film. I say this in every video, but I guarantee so many people miss this. That would ruin the conductivity of this little thermal pad here. You can pop this to one side and then we can look at the SSD. And for what I'm building here, I don't think we need like a particularly fast drive. We're still going for a rapid one. This is PCI Generation 4 or PCI Generation 5, which is interesting. It's from Samsung. It's the 990 Evo Plus. When this first came out, it was just too expensive, but you can get this for a very, very good price now. This is a 2 terabyte drive. And interestingly, you can find this in the UK at the moment for, I think it's under £120 or so for 2 terabytes, which I think is pretty good. But it should be pretty straightforward to install. You just want to line this up with a slot. Oh, and then realize actually that you do need to put a little nut in here, or a little screw. And yeah, there it is. Tiny little screw. Just grab this and insert it where it says 2280. Then you can go back and pick up your drive, and once again, just insert that like that. You can screw it to secure it, but you shouldn't need to, because that will be held in place by this heatsink. Just give it a screw down to secure it. I mean, I guess I should say, because this is sponsored by ASUS, use the screw, but I don't use the screw. Oh, and ladies and gentlemen, once you've done that, I think for the most part, the hardest bit's done. Maybe the most fiddly bit is still to come. But once that's underway, you can now actually start building inside the chassis itself. And this is an interesting one. This is the GT502 Horizon ARGB from ASUS. It's very, very easy to build in because you've got this like toolless release for the side panels and just dual chamber cases in general. If you are a beginner and you're happy to have something a little bit larger, I would actually recommend you go down this route, just because you've got so much room for cable management, and just putting everything in is just easier in my experience. Having said that, if you are primarily building this as like a productivity machine, I would probably look at one of the ASUS Prime cases, and maybe like the AP201 if you go for a smaller micro ATX motherboard, if you want to have, as I say, something small that you can fit on your desk. But if it's going underneath, or you've got a large desk and obviously you want the look of something that's a bit more gaming-esque, if you like, then this is a great shout. I mean, look how many fans you can fit. It's fantastic. But I think the time for crappy jokes has passed. Let's grab our case, put it flat on our desk, and then we can actually pick up the motherboard. Before you do this, do make sure if you have an I/O shield, this one is pre-attached to the board, that it goes in this little slot at the back of the case, and that all of the standoffs are pre-applied in the A position if you're using an ATX motherboard, as obviously this is what allows it to kind of stand up and not touch the case directly. Obviously it does touch the case, but those are all areas on the board that have been designated as safe to touch. But interestingly, it looks as if this one is slightly tight with this fan at the back. I might remove that just to make it easier to actually get this in. So we can just park this to one side for a second, then we grab our board once again, just line that up with those holes, and then in theory the fan should, there it is, just sit back on top. Once that fan is back into position, you can then grab the accessories box that actually comes in the box of the case rather than like pre-tied. And in here you will find your screws. Use the smaller ones that have like a ring-like disc on it, and then just secure the board down at each of the points. And then once you've done that, you should then have something that is starting to properly resemble a computer. The other thing as well is worth bearing in mind that if you do go for a larger chassis, you do have more, well, higher volume of air inside it, which obviously is going to be better when it comes to thermals. Only thing about this case that is definitely worth noting is that you can put extra fans down the bottom, but you don't get them included, which is why ASUS has also provided me with some TR120 reverse blades that we can put in down the bottom. But don't feel like you need those. But if you want to kind of complete the look, then obviously you can do that and also give yourself better airflow in the process. Let's swing this over to the other side though, and then let's have a look at some of these cables. We have this little bundle here that will contain everything that connects the case to the motherboard. So as we said earlier, things like our USB Type-C, our USB 3, HD audio, power switch, all of this jazz. And actually while I'm here, I'm also going to take away temporarily this fan frame just to make it a bit easier to access everything. We do also have this little SATA connection, which is going to connect to our power supply, to this little hub that we have here, which does our addressable RGB. It's worth noting as well that you can actually plug this into your motherboard as well with this ARGB cable, and then have everything synced together. Or if you just want to have your case control everything, which personally I think is easier because you don't need software, just cycle through a few different effects, you can do that standalone with just the case as it is. Let's start this by feeding the cables through to their respective positions and start connecting everything. So our USB 3 is just here. Above that we have our USB Type-C. Down the bottom we have a fan connection that's going to do all of our fans because they're daisy chained around the back. Then all the way on the right we have our power switch, which is at the top right of that little bit, and then the reset is just below that. This is a little bit fiddly, so I'd always recommend that you look in the motherboard manufacturer's manual. Editor Car will put like the little pin out here just to help you, because it's very easy to forget, and if you plug it in wrong, your power button won't work and you'll be sad. But it's usually very fixable. And then last but certainly not least, we also have our HD audio, which is all the way at the bottom left. And then once we've done that, I'm actually pleased to say there's not that much more to do, but now comes the job I don't like. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I hate radiators. The reason is not because I don't like what they do, it's just because installing them always seems to take ages. It is definitely worth it if you want something that's going to look better, it's going to transport better, and obviously give you fantastic cooling performance. But yes, air coolers in my experience are just a little bit easier to install, but we give this one a go. This one is obviously from ASUS. It is the Tough Gaming LC3 360 ARGB LCD. That's quite a mouthful, but let's give this a spin round, and then actually look, we've got a bit of a presentation box. Ooh, that's fancy. And I'm hoping inside this they have actually pre-installed it, and oh yes, look, it looks as if they have. This is the best trend that is happening with all-in-ones, and it makes me very happy because it means that I go from hating radiators to not minding radiators. But to get this properly installed, it should be pretty straightforward. We just need to grab our Intel back plates. I will move this slightly so you can see. Give this a spin round, and this area here is where we're going to want to put our back plate, look. So we just pick this up, and just line this up with the holes. You might find that you do need to actually adjust them slightly, just by pulling these bits out. Then it really is just a case of lining up those holes, obviously making sure no cables are pinching. Oh, and this is why this would actually be easier to do whilst the motherboard was still on the box, but I'll be honest, I forgot. Because now you need to actually screw into these whilst kind of holding it in place. Just grab these double-sided Intel screws and then feed those and twist into place. Then you can pop your case to one side for a second, grab this little pump head. Now do be very careful at this stage. You can see we've got some thermal compound actually pre-applied on this, which is going to make our life easier, but you don't want to now put this down on your desk or like a box or something, because obviously you'll lose some of it. So instead, being ultra careful, grab your Intel bars and just gently push them into place. Then you'll need to use all means necessary, not to eat the bag, but instead to grab the screws and then carefully pop them in the hole and fit back into place. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we can start to get this mounted. We'll take off these little straps that are actually quite good for moving this around, but if you don't like the look of them, you can just take them off. So we can actually take the top cover off, and then I believe it should literally just be a case of making sure the tubes are in the orientation that you want, and obviously our cable can kind of fold around the side like that, I suppose. Just position this up the top, look. Then remember that once again, you haven't opened your bag of screws, and then obviously just get it fitted down. And then once that's complete, we can then remove this plastic cover again that I put on. Remember not to get thermal paste everywhere. And then ideally, just line this up over those posts. Realize again that you do actually have to move the screws to line up with those posts, and then it literally just lays on top like that, look, and then fits down into place. It is slightly fiddly, but as long as you do it lightly at first so everything catches, and then you screw down in a cross pattern, you are going to get nice even force on the socket. Let's then take the opportunity to get all of these cables managed. So this cooler one is going to come up the top and around the side before plugging in where it says CPU fan at the top. Then we have a USB cable for our LCD and this little fan header for the pump. And then pull it through and plug it in where it says all-in-one pump. USB is going to plug into one of these USB 2 headers at the bottom, where it says USB. Oh, and then giving it a spin around, just one more cable was this addressable RGB. We actually have room on our hub, look, so we can just take off this protective cover and then just feed this so it plugs in here. You do also get some cable management straps inside the box. I would start to use these now, as when you get your power supply inside, as you'll soon see, the cables start to go a bit nuts. I'm also going to take the opportunity to add those extra fans down the bottom now. It should be really easy to do, literally just take them out of the box, unscrew this little fan bracket at the bottom, and then these fans can go on the top, but with the cables facing that way. Then screw them down, feed the cables through the holes, then literally just find the groove to slot that back into place, and then we can start to tidy up this mess of cables that we now have at the back. But essentially we just need to plug our fans into the headers on the motherboard, and then RGB we can just daisy chain together essentially with what we've already got here. So let's connect up our RGB. Just to make things easier for me, I am going to daisy chain the fan speed as well with the adapter that you get in the box, but do be advised that if you want the best control possible, you want to plug those in individually to the ports on the motherboard. But for me, we just have this one connection, chassis fan 4, at the bottom right. Oh, and I will admit, that's not the most interesting bit about building a PC. My favourite bit is always the graphics card, especially when it comes to a gaming rig. The one we're using here is an RTX 5070 Ti. This is obviously very high end. It has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, which is going to be great for gaming, but also for workloads as well. And because it's NVIDIA, this isn't sponsored by NVIDIA, but there's a lot of applications that will use CUDA. So if you have an application that can be accelerated in that way, that is definitely going to help you. Once again, it kind of depends on the application as for the exact GPU that you should go for. I mean, do you want to go for one that has loads of VRAM if you're going to need it? Do you need one that has like proper like compute performance? What is going to be the right balance for you? Again, only really you can answer that. If you're going for a video editing PC, then personally speaking, this is probably what I would go for. This or something even higher end if it was, well, a really high-end production. Mainly just because for what we use, we have 3 Blackmagic 6K cameras, and it does actually use a lot of VRAM. We find that even on like 10 gigabyte cards, we were experiencing a lot of crashes, where as soon as we swapped over to an RTX 4090, that actually solved all of our VRAM problems, which was great because it meant the Resolve doesn't really crash very often anymore. It still does every now and then, it's not perfect. Once again, do some research, look at benchmarks, find the best possible components for your particular rig. Like, I hope that this video is going to be really helpful, but specifically, you need to know what it is that you need and obviously buy something appropriate. But let's get our PC ready to receive by opening up our PCIe slots. Here we're using numbers 2 and 3. We position this nice and close, but actually I'd recommend most people lay your PC down flat. When you do this, it's just easier on camera. It looks better if we can line this up with that PCIe finger and then literally just give that a push home. Then just use those screws to fit it down into position. Oh, but of course the bit that everyone will need, regardless of how high end you want to go, it's going to be a power supply. Now, the specific number on this, the wattage, this is obviously going to be the maximum output, and so different rigs are going to have different requirements. Now, 1000 watts is quite a good bet for this particular rig, especially if we're going to be doing overclocking, but you could actually step this down to an 850, and I don't think you'd run into any issues. Again, depends what you're going to put inside this, the upgrades you're going to make, if you're going to add a load of add-in cards, overclocking, all of that good stuff. Efficiency also comes into play. If you're using this every day, if you have a really efficient power supply, it can save you some money in the long run, but obviously they're more expensive to buy if they're more efficient in the first place. This one is gold rated for efficiency, and it does also come with our new PCI Generation 5 connection here, which means it's just one cable that actually plugs into the graphics card. Older generation PSUs would be used like adapters, which would look a bit ugly, which wouldn't really matter in a productivity machine, but something like this where you're going to show it off, you want to have that native connection. And then if you recall, at the start of this video, I said building in a dual chamber case is easier as a first time builder. This is one of the main reasons why, because you can literally then just grab your power supply and this will fit down the bottom, and then you still maintain good and easy access to all of these ports, which is great for upgrades, but then also just if you're a first timer, you might miss things, so you're gonna have to constantly like take your power supply back out, put it back in a traditional case where you kind of like can't actually access all of the ports. So this is nice, and then you can see you've got so much room here if you did want to add extra bits and bobs, and if you just wanted to kind of stuff cables. It's very beginner friendly. But for now, let's just do the finishing touches by screwing this into place, plugging in our SATA connection here at the top. Then we can pick up our ATX. This is going to go at the top right of the motherboard, so it needs to be top left here. Then we can grab these two 8-pin CPU connections. They are helpfully labelled, so it shouldn't be too difficult. And you just want to tuck these through at the top right. And then last, but certainly not least, we want to grab our PCIe Generation 5. And if there's a way to tuck this underneath and out the back, that's going to look best. Not always possible. Sometimes you do have to go in by the side. And actually, I think today is that day, but kind of looks better anyway, because I like it to have like a little bit of curve to it. It should be pretty straightforward to plug in. Just obviously make sure it is in properly, really tight. You don't want to mess around with these connections, so until you have an audible click, and just give it a nice push and make sure there's not any real flex on the end of that. Then we can grab the ATX. Really can't miss this, it's massive at the top right. And then last but certainly not least, we have these 8 pins that push in at the top left. But then, ladies and gentlemen, that is your rig complete. The productivity powerhouse is now in the building. As I say, the styling, I know for a fact, isn't going to be to everyone's taste. If you want something smaller, you want something that looks a little bit more officey, then there's loads of great options, as I say, like Asus's AP201, or they've got a new, like, bigger one I really love, and I think that would nail the look. Around the back, we haven't done our cable management yet, but again, the good thing about going for a case like this is you can literally just kind of tuck these cables into all of the spare areas. No, actually, hang on a second. I realized that the hard drive cage was actually blocking one of these fans, so I've taken a couple of the straps that come in the box and just neatened everything up, because you don't want to, like, cable jamming in your fan. That would be bad, and obviously you want the airflow. So I've literally just kind of bulked that there. 1 strap, 2 strap, 3 strap. Let's see if it works. We'll grab our Asus ROG OLED 4K monitor. You know it, you love it. It's the PC-Centric mouse mat, available at pccentric.store in a clearance sale. Get yours now while the cost is low. But let's hook up our DisplayPort, make sure everything is good to go, find the power button, and then let's see if it jumps into life. And it's always a good start when you get some RGB lighting. That's what we want to see. And it is all very well synced up at the moment, isn't it? I mean, I know this is the first boot, but it looks good. I'm not a massive fan of that RGB effect. Is it going to work straight out the gate? If we change this to something else, yes, there it is. Okay, let's go with that. That's a little bit more interesting, a bit more vibrant. It would annoy your colleagues if you were to use this in a work environment. But let's be honest, you're probably working at home anyway, right? And okay, I was going to talk a little bit more about the system, but the booting is complete. New CPU has been installed, our Ultra 7 265K. Let's press F1 to go into the BIOS. And I don't think at the moment we will be able to enable that boost mode, because that is a new feature that you need to do a BIOS update in order to get working. Let's head over to advanced mode, go to tool, easy flash 3. We'll find our BIOS file, so the Z890-P Wi-Fi Asus cap. You don't actually need to unzip it either. You can literally just drag it onto USB. If you're using the USB BIOS flashback utility though, then you do need to use the renamer tool, or at least manually like rename it to whatever's going to be accepted by this board. And you can see actually that was pretty quick. Only took around about 2 or 3 minutes. But do be aware that with the Asus boards, I find that it restarts and then it kind of like does a couple of other things as well. So hold your horses, don't unplug the power cable until you're like completely back in the BIOS and you know everything's properly updated. But let's wait for it to restart, and sure enough, it's on our LED firmware and it's now doing some internal Thunderbolt retimer firmware. Right, okay then, we've restarted. We are back to where I want to be. Let's see what these new tuning things are like. So this is the same easy mode that we saw before. So we've got our XMP, DRAM, everything is suitably high res, which is quite nice for a motherboard actually. Ah, there it is, Intel 200 series boost. Let's enable this. We'll say okay, it's telling us the specific memory that we will need to get this to work, and then hopefully it will restart and work. Oh, the sound of silence, that sounds good to me. That usually implies that the overclock has taken, which is great. So that one simple setting would be nice if it was in the easy mode rather than the advanced, but still absolutely fine. And then hopefully we're going to boot straight into Windows. And so then everyone, through the power of what I must admit is actually a mediocre night's sleep.
Slept like a baby.
But unfortunately did wake up very early at 5 AM because it's very light here in the UK. That's not relevant though. In fact, what is more relevant is the fact that we have actually added some RGB strips. I didn't realize Asus also supplied these. They're magnetic and they're tailor-made for this case. They literally just hook on at the top and the bottom. That's in some of the B-roll, but not all of it, just so you can see before and after essentially. And then also just to try and get as much performance as possible, I also adjusted the power power limits on this motherboard. I have a feeling that this could potentially affect your warranty, so don't use this if you just want to use the boost mode. But essentially, I was just wanting to make sure we were getting consistent amount of power that wasn't going to be held back if we actually have the thermal headroom in the system. So at 90 degrees, the power limits will adjust, but in the meantime, it's free to essentially just like to use as much power as it needs to get the most performance out of the chip. And the first thing I want to do is actually this is a mock-up project. This is not actually one of our final videos, in case that wasn't clear. But I was thinking, how can I kind of show you the performance, if you like, of this system and what it can do? Well, firstly, here we have 4 different feeds of Blackmagic 6K. It cuts out because one of the clips is quite short, but you can actually see if we hit that play button, bear in mind we're actually recording this with the PC at the same time as well. You can see we have 4 6K feeds actually playing back really nicely at the same time, which is pretty cool. I'll go back to the start so you can see 29.97. We're not dropping any frames when we're playing that back, which is pretty cool. And then also when we go into the color tab, you can see this first clip here. I've layered quite a few different things on this. We've got like an object removal, so my poster has mysteriously disappeared. We've got some tracking on this as well for a bit of color. And again, you just play this back. It's 6K raw. We're playing this back, and yeah, like no issues whatsoever. Not the best object removal you're going to see, but again, it was crude. I just wanted to show you essentially if you're going to use this for video editing, you can just kind of cruise through this like butter. It's really, really slick. That's the combination of both the CPU and the GPU. Depends on the codec and everything that you're going to be using. But one of the new features actually on the new NVIDIA GPUs is that if you're going to be decoding, I believe it's 422, it's now hardware accelerated, which can make a massive difference rather than just relying on the CPU to actually make that work. But I also have installed a Blender on this machine. I'll be honest, I'm not a Blender whiz, so apologies for that. But if we open up some of the open source projects that they had on their website, you can see we can move around these really clearly. And when we hit F12 to actually render this, obviously it is going to depend on the dynamicness of the scene, what you've got going on it, the renderer that you use, the lighting, everything. But you can see this renders really, really quick. I actually used this exact thing years ago, and it's crazy like how much difference it makes actually. So this is also accelerated by the RTX card that you have in here, but you've got a few different renderers that you're going to use in Blender. So some will use the GPU, some will use the CPU. There are going to be differences between what you're trying to achieve. There's no point like really overspeccing a graphics card if you're just using the CPU, but then also if it's mainly all about VRAM or the graphics card, obviously pump more money into that. Also, once again, as I touched on earlier, obviously do bear in mind that you will need a decent amount of RAM in a productivity machine as well. Once again, depends exactly on your use case. But in Blender, this is a different project. This one's called Gold Splash, or just Splash, I guess. And you can see we're using 20 gigabytes of RAM just to actually have the project open. But as soon as I hit the render button with F12, you'll see that the memory usage will obviously start to climb. And again, it depends entirely what it is that you're going to use, but you can see all of those assets, especially if you're going to be rendering on the CPU, will get allocated to RAM. And if you run out of RAM or VRAM or whatever it is, you might find that the project slows down or won't actually render at all. And also this is quite a good example actually about how we're using the graphics card here. You can see when rendering that was at around about 98%. Obviously it's dropped down now, and our memory usage obviously peaked at around about like 33 gig or so. So yes, you get the point. Don't want to sound like a broken record. Depends what you're going to use the system for, but make sure you spec your system appropriately. But now should we move on to my personal favorite bit, PC gaming. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, what better title is there to kick things off than some Apex Legends? Of course, as we know the story, I was playing this religiously for years till I got too frustrated because I wasn't good enough and I gave up. But I still love to come back to it from time to time when I kind of need my fix. And we've actually turned this up with our max FPS unlimited command. If you're wondering if you're playing a game why you're sometimes capped at like 144 FPS or something, that is the reason why. And what we're looking for here is not only the frame rate, which is pretty ridiculous at the moment. We're getting around about 270 FPS at 4K with all the settings set to high. We're not using any DLSS, any NIS upscaling, anything like that. And we're getting around about 250 FPS, which obviously is very much overkill, especially bear in mind that this is at 4K. Realistically, multiplayer games, you're probably far more likely to want to turn this down to 1440p or use upscaling to just get a higher frame rate really, so you're getting more fluidity. But the other cool thing as well is that this is a ProArt monitor that they've loaned out for this video that is very, very color accurate. It's actually got a built-in colorimeter that you can use to actually make sure that this is like true to life and as accurate as possible. But because this is 4K 160 FPS or 160 Hertz, obviously it means if you're a work by day, game by night kind of person, that you're not compromising because you can still get a high frame rate and allow you to play games like Apex Legends essentially without really too much compromise. Again, I'd personally still turn this down to 1440p, but to be fair, there's not actually any reason to do this because we're well above the refresh rate of the monitor at, about 200 to 250 FPS, depending on where and when you are in the game. The thing that you want to pay close attention to, it's the GPU load at the top right corner of your screen, because if you're getting any CPU bottlenecking, then this will drop from 99% to 90, 80, 70, depending on obviously how much of your GPU you're using, and that tells you the bottleneck in your system essentially, or it shows you that you're not having the graphics card as the bottleneck, which if the CPU was getting in the way, that would tell us. But at 4K, it doesn't look like it is at the moment. So let's turn this down to 1440p and then have a look if that changes anything. Well, as you can see, indeed it does. Our GPU load is now around about 78, 75%. I think it is slightly skewed because there is a frame rate limit in Apex Legends of 300 FPS, but as you can see, we're not actually using the full amount of the graphics card at the moment, though it's very, very close, isn't it? So maybe this actually isn't the best example because, as I say, we're very close to that limit. But I mean, it doesn't matter too much in Apex Legends because yes, we're getting as close to 300 FPS really as we can. Everything is going to be super slick, super smooth, and as I say, like work by day, game by night. But ladies and gentlemen, I think the time to up the ante has come because, let's face it, Apex Legends is not the most demanding game in the world, whereas something like this, you need a very, very beefy GPU to get the best out of it. I will say that actually, if you do have that, it's pretty well optimized. I've not really run into any serious issues with this. Sometimes it doesn't launch and you have to like end a process with the task manager and then you're good to go. But in terms of once the game's actually open, I think it looks absolutely fantastic. It's got ray tracing baked in, and if you are using an NVIDIA graphics card, you can use things like the frame generation. What you're seeing now as well, this isn't even like low settings or anything like that. This is actually at the high preset. We are outputting at 4K. We're using DLSS, the new DLSS 4 transformer model to actually get there, which is why the game looks this good. And as you can see, we're currently getting around about 120 FPS, as people are very, very angry with me because I clearly shouldn't be in this cave. Bearing in mind, as I say, we're getting a 4K output. I'm very, very impressed with this, about 140 FPS, but we're not using frame generation, so we can actually go into our video settings once again. Find where it says frame gen. We can go up to 3 and 4x multi-frame generation. Be careful of the latency if you're going to do this. You don't want it to go above 55 milliseconds or you can start to feel it. But actually in this scenario, I don't think we really need to use the multi-frame generation because I think 160 FPS on this monitor, we don't really want to go too far above this, or we're literally just going to be showing AI frames rather than rendered frames. So yeah, you can see we're now getting about 170 FPS. This is an easy bit of the game to run. So as soon as we actually kind of get into something that's outside where there's a lot more buildings in, I imagine it will drop down. But yeah, around about 170 FPS, PC latency of about 25 milliseconds, and we're almost using all of the GPU. It's about 95%, but I have a feeling that's more down to the frame generation rather than the CPU. I mean, we can test that. Let's turn the frame generation off, come back, and are we using, yeah, there it is, back up to 98%. So actually, once again, in Indiana Jones, we're not seeing any issues with that CPU. But obviously, it depends on the game as well, right? Some games will work better than others, depends how multi-threaded as well the game is. But I think the hardest test that we have, and the one where we really might see some bottlenecking, is actually going to be The Last of Us Part 2. And I've got to say that when I played this game a few years ago, I did enjoy it, but my main issue with it was actually the pacing of the game. I think, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it's good to know that the game's kind of like 40 hours long, because you'll get to a bit like 20 hours long and you think you're at the end, but you kind of do the whole thing again, sort of thing. No spoilers, but I would have preferred to have known that going in. But this is a game that is very, very demanding on the CPU. We've currently got this set to the very high preset. We've also got this set to 4K, DLSS with a new transformer model in this once again, but we have DLSS set to performance. This is a lot better than it was with DLSS 3, which to be fair was already pretty good, because especially on a 27-inch screen like this, you can see a little bit of like motion trailing around here if you're being nitpicky, but realistically this looks really, really good, and we're currently getting around about 120 FPS as well. You can see our 1% lows there, around about like 102 or so. PC latency of about 20. We're not using frame gen or anything once again. So yeah, really nice smooth experience, 4K resolution. Obviously you can use variable refresh rate if you have a monitor as well with that tech to kind of smooth it out. But I did think we might be running into a little bit of bottlenecking, but we're not at the moment. But of course, not everyone is going to be playing at 4K, so let's turn this down to 1440p. We'll also adjust the DLSS now to balanced, as you do want to bring this up as you bring the resolution down. And we'll come out of this and and let's see what that does to the frame rate. Obviously it's increased, that's pretty much a given, to around about 175 FPS, and I was thinking we probably were going to see a little bit of bottlenecking on that GPU, but interestingly that is still at 98-99%. This was my plan. I thought we would like build it up and get more and more demanding as we go. So I mean, to be fair, there are actually more demanding bits in the game, so let's change the scene, as this actually does have a fair bit more going on in it, so I'd expect to see a little bit of dip in utilization. And yeah, you can see every now and then, look, it's mainly at 99%, but as we move about, you might start, there it is, you might start to see it dip slightly to like 93, 94, 87 or so. And I think the game does get slightly more demanding when you get into Seattle a bit later and there's more buildings and things. Obviously depends what it is that you play, the resolution. If we turn this down to 1080p, which to be fair we can do, then I'm sure that will obviously show us a bit more bottlenecking. So let's apply that, come out of it, and has that made much of a difference? Yes, it does seem to be dropping down a little bit more now. You can see around about like 85, 77% utilization in places. It does change depending on what's going on. But it's all about the frame rate, right? So if the frame rate isn't going up like a crazy amount, well, it shows that you may as well just be able to run this at a high resolution and get more out of your display. I don't think many people are going to be playing at 1080p with a graphics card like this, but hey, there are some people out there with certain use cases and things. But essentially the whole point of this video was just to kind of showcase really that obviously you need to buy different parts depending on what you're going to use it for. So this is a great system primarily for work, but especially going to be doing 4K gaming. As you can see, it works great in pretty much every scenario that we've tested. But it's not going to be for everyone, right? It's all about what you're going to be using your PC for. You want to spec up as many cores as possible if you're using an application that needs it. Obviously something like single-threaded, if you're going like for a gaming PC, you want like the best single-threaded performance for most games at least. RAM, SSD, obviously there's so much to think about. We can show you how to put it all together. We can show you how all of these different parts work. We can tell you, as I say, that the Ultra 7, I think actually if you need a high core count CPU for like 270 quid, I think that's a bit of a bargain, to be honest with you, assuming your use case obviously makes sense for it. But it's all about getting the right bits for your build. So I'd love to hear your feedback on this. What do you make of our system? Do you think that this is a setup that makes sense, or would you go for something completely different? We'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Temperatures, by the way, are about 54 degrees on our GPU and 64 on the CPU, but this is slightly skewed at the moment because obviously we're not using all of the graphics card. It went up to around about 62 degrees earlier, so still very, very cool and quiet. And if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this build, you can find it listed down below. But smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and if you do want to check out a full gaming PC build, we'll leave them linked in the end screen. But thanks for watching, we'll catch you in the next one.